Steerforth are not so alarming to him as Mr. Littimer, the unimpeachable gentleman's gentleman. This is exquisitely true to the masculine emotions, especially in their underdeveloped state. A youth of common courage does not fear anything violent, but he is in mortal fear of anything correct. This may or may not be the reason that so few female writers understand their male characters. But this fact remains, that the more sincere and passionate and even headlong a lad is, the more certain he is to be conventional. The bolder and freer he seems, the more the traditions of the college or the rules of the club will hold him with their gibes of gossamer, and the less afraid he is of his enemies, the more cravenly he will be afraid of his friends. Herein lies indeed the darkest period of our ethical doubt and chaos. The fear is that as morals become less urgent, manners will become more so, and men who have forgotten the fear of God will retain the fear of Littimer. We shall merely sink into a much meaner bondage. For when you break the great laws, you do not get liberty, you do not even get anarchy, you get the small laws. The sting and strength of this piece of fiction, then, do by a rare accident lie in the circumstance that it was so largely founded on fact. David Copperfield is the great answer of a great romancer to the realists. David says, in effect, "What? You say that Dickens' tales are too purple really to have happened? Why, this is what happened to me, and it seemed the most purple of all. You say that the Dickens heroes are too handsome and triumphant? Why, no prince or paladin Ariosto was ever so handsome and triumphant as the head boy seemed to me, walking before me in the sun. You say that Dickens' villains are too black? Why, there was no ink in the devil's inkstand black enough for my own stepfather when I had to live in the same house with him. The facts are quite the other way to what you suppose. This life of grey studies and half tones, the absence of which you regret in Dickens, is only life as it is looked at. This life of heroes and villains is life as it is lived. The life a man knows best is exactly the life he finds most full of fierce certainties and battles between good and ill, his own. Oh yes, the life we do not care about may easily be a psychological comedy. Other people's lives may easily be human documents. But a man's own life is always a melodrama. There are other effective things in David Copperfield. They are not all autobiographical, but they nearly all have this new note of quietude and reality. Micawber is gigantic, an immense assertion of the truth that the way to live is to exaggerate everything. But of him I shall have to speak more fully in another connection. Mrs. Micawber, artistically speaking, is even better. She is very nearly the best thing in Dickens. Nothing could be more absurd and at the same time more true than her clear, argumentative manner of speech as she sits smiling and expounding in the midst of ruin. What could be more lucid and logical and unanswerable than her statement of the prolegomena of the Medway problem, of which the first step must be to see the Medway, or of the coal trade, which required talent and capital? Talent Mr. Micawber has. Capital Mr. Micawber has not. It seems as if something should have come at last out of so clear and scientific arrangement of the ideas. Indeed, if, as has been suggested, we regard David Copperfield as an unconscious defence of the poetic view of life, we might regard Mrs. Micawber as an unconscious satire on the logical view of life. She sits as a monument of the hopelessness and helplessness of reason in the face of this romantic and unreasonable world. As I have taken Dombey and Son as the book before the transition, and David Copperfield as typical of the transition itself, I may perhaps take Bleak House as the book after the transition, and so complete the description. Bleak House has every characteristic of his new realistic culture. Dickens never now, as in his early books, revels in parts he likes and scamps the parts he does not, after the manner of Scott. He does not, as in previous tales, leave his heroes and heroines mere walking gentlemen and ladies, with nothing at all to do but walk. He expends upon them at least ingenuity. By the expedients, successful or not, of the self-revelation of Esther, or the humorous inconsistencies of Rick, he makes his younger figures, if not lovable, at least not readable. Everywhere we see this tighter and more careful grip. He does not, for instance, when he wishes to denounce a dark institution, sandwich it in as a mere episode in a rambling story of adventure, as the debtors' prison is embedded in the body of Pickwick, or the low Yorkshire school in the body of Nicholas Nickleby. He puts the Court of Chancery in the centre of the stage, a sombre and sinister temple, and groups round it in artistic relations decaying and frantic figures, its offspring and its satirists. An old dipsomaniac keeps a rag and bone shop, type of futility and antiquity, and calls himself the Lord Chancellor. A little mad old maid hangs about the courts on a forgotten or imaginary lawsuit, and says, with perfect and pungent irony, "I am expecting a judgment shortly, on the day of judgment." Rick and Ada and Esther are not mere strollers who have strayed into the court of law. They are its children, its symbols, and its victims. The righteous indignation of the book is not at the red heat of anarchy, but at the white heat of art. Its anger is patient and plodding, like some historic revenge. Moreover, it slowly and carefully creates the real psychology of oppression, the endless formality, the endless unemotional urbanity, the endless hope deferred. These things make one feel the fact of injustice more than the madness of Nero. For it is not the activeness of tyranny that maddens, but its passiveness. We hate the deafness of the god more than his strength. Silence is the unbearable repartee. Again, we can see in this book strong traces of an increase in social experience. Dickens, as his fame carried him into more fashionable circles, began really to understand something of what is strong and what is weak in the English upper class. Sir Leicester Dedlock is far more effective condemnation of oligarchy than the ugly swagger of Sir Mulberry Hawk, because pride stands out more plainly in all its impotence and insolence as the one weakness of a good man than as one of the million weaknesses of a bad one. Dickens, like all young radicals, had imagined in his youth that aristocracy rested upon the hardiness of somebody. He found it, as we all do, that it rests upon the softness of everybody. It is very hard not to like Sir Leicester Dedlock, not to applaud his silly old speeches, so foolish, so manly, so genuinely English, so disastrous to England. It is true that the English people love a lord, but it is not true that they fear him. Rather, if anything, they pity him. There creeps into their love something of the feeling they have towards a baby or a black man. In their hearts they think it admirable that Sir Leicester Dedlock should be able to speak at all. And so a system which no iron laws and no bloody battles could possibly force upon a people is preserved from generation to generation by pure, weak good nature. In Bleak House occurs the character of Harold Skimpole, the character whose alleged likeness to Leigh Hunt has laid Dickens open to so much disapproval. Unjust disapproval, I think, as far as fundamental morals are concerned. In method he was a little clamorous and clumsy, as indeed he was apt to be. But when he said that it was possible to combine a certain tone of conversation taken from a particular man with other characteristics which were not meant to be his, he surely said what all men who write stories know. A work of fiction often consists in combining a pair of whiskers seen in one street with a crime seen in another. he may quite possibly have really meant only to make Leigh Hunt's light philosophy the mask for a new